The year is 2022, and Cars fans finally have a new piece of on-screen media to look forward to. The long-awaited, highly anticipated Cars Disney Plus series, Cars on the Road. But that show didn't launch until September, the month where the Cars diecast line typically ends for the year, leaving the toy line in a pretty unique position until then, and a pretty interesting one, at least in the eyes of collectors. I remember 2022 being seen as a pretty big disappointment at the time, with its first new release, Sudeep with VR headset, not releasing until April. Granted, 2022 was also a time where it was very difficult to find cars thanks to massive shipping delays caused by the pandemic, with a lot of items not hitting store shelves until months after they should have. For example, they released Holiday Hotshot McQueen in one of the first waves of the year, meant to release at the end of 2021 as part of the 2022 line, and he didn't show up until many months after. But now, 4 years removed, looking back at it, now that we're no longer in that year and can just objectively look at the items that came out, I genuinely think that 2022 is one of the most underrated years in the history of the Cars diecast line. Everyone mainly remembers this year for the Cars on the Road releases, and rightfully so. Cars on the Road gave us genuinely some of the most unique Cars diecasts in the history of the toy line, and I think, honestly, some of the all-time greatest. The show focuses on Lightning and Mater going on a road trip to reach Mater's sister's wedding. And in each episode, they come across a different sort of group themed to a different archetype. We had clown cars. We had, of course, the Cryptid Busters looking for monsters in the woods. There's one where they go to a haunted hotel. There's an episode where they race on the salt flats. Each episode giving us a brand new cast of cool and unique Cars characters, the likes of which we had never seen before. And the Cars diecast line really did a great job capturing these very unique items and the many unique looks for McQueen and Mater that came with them. There weren't too many Cars on the Road releases for 2022. There were about 12 in the main line, alongside a handful of color changers, plastic releases and playsets, and other merchandise. As in terms of diversity for what they released, it was mainly just kind of the main characters, McQueen, Mater, who was just regular Mater on a Cars on the Road card back, Cruise, couple episodes from Salt Fever, one of the Cryptid Busters, and a couple of the Clown Cars. They definitely diversified a lot more in 2023 and 2024, and I'm going to focus more on Cars on the Road in the 2023 episode, where our item is going to be from that series, and a very unique item at that, because Cars on the Road definitely gave us some very cool items, even if the show was, at least in the eyes of many fans, ultimately kind of forgettable. But I really think that where this year shines is with the movie releases. For the first time since Cars 3 came out, they did a pretty good job at balancing items, new releases, from each of the 3 Cars movies, giving us some very cool Cars from all 3. For the first Cars movie, we received Bertha Butterswagon, one of the most anticipated canceled releases of all time. We also got Keith Cone, tractor with tire in mouth, Mater that could latch on to McQueen and tow him. That's right, this was the year that started putting little holes in the bases of McQueen so that he could be towed. Cars 2 gave us Colin Borev, and today's review, Revney Grillante. Cars 3 gave us Dana Crankoff, Sudeep with VR headset. Some very cool cars, a lot of them being background characters, many of them being background characters where we hadn't received a new one in a long time, or from categories that rarely ever got items. Keith Cone was a new Piston Cup race fan who doesn't have any Piston Cup accessories, a rarity in the line. We finally got a Cars 2 camera car, something that barely happens, with Dana Crankoff, a very interesting variant of one of the Rusty's Racing Center trainees. Still waiting for the other one, by the way. And from Cars 2, we received, for one of the only times ever in the history of the line, background characters from the Radiator Spring scenes. In fact, pretty much all of this year's Cars 2 releases were focused on the Radiator Spring scenes in this movie. Revney Grillante is an item that really means a lot to me. He's just such a cool item But it's more than just this being a cool item and being an item from a category we rarely ever get anything from. Revney Grillante is the Cars 2 Vern's taxi. Vern, of course, being a background character in the first Cars movie, who we see entering the LA Speedway. He is a reference to an actual taxi company, I believe it was a company, that the Pixar employees would take to work. Since they're stationed in Emeryville, California, they decided to incorporate that character into Cars, and in Cars 2, they introduced a new Vern's taxi that appears in the background of Radiator Springs. I always thought this was such a cool Easter egg and just a fun little piece of world building, and I never thought it would get a diecast. This was a pipe dream item of mine for years, literal years. I always thought, don't roll away, Revney. I always thought that this would be such a cool item, and to get it, I think it was genuinely awesome. I mean, really, really, really great release. Revney's an item I like so much. He was in the first ever episode of Cars That Should Be Made. I thought it was a long shot. I thought it would never happen, but Revney released this year, and so did a VR trainee and Tractor with Tire in Mouth, who were both also in the first episode of Cars That Should Be Made. Look, I'm not saying I'm the reason why these happened, but it's a really strange coincidence, isn't it? In addition to these fun new releases, 2022 gave us some pretty solid re-releases as well. Probably most notably, Race Damage the King. Otis came back. Some really good Cars 2 items like Zen Master, Craig Faster, and he's not a Cars 2 item, but he's another one. Bruiser Bukowski. And Lee Rosse, for the first time ever, a re-release of a chase, which is interesting, right? They didn't make new Super Chases after 2020, so this year they decided they would start bringing them back. We'll talk more about that in a future episode. Oh, and who can forget 2022 is the year where we got 2 Miles axle rods for some reason. Normal and with microphone back. But hey, I'm not complaining. Like I said, I think this is a pretty solid year. Add to that the return of the NASCAR line with some new items. We've got a pretty solid year all around. Anyway, guys, welcome back to 20 Years of Favorites. This is a series where I take a look at my favorite item from each year of the Cars diecast line. Today, we're really in the home stretch. It's 2022. We're taking a look at Revney Grillante. This may be the latest into a video I've ever done the intro, but don't count on it. There's probably a time in the series later because I tend to talk a whole lot about each year. Yeah, 2022, I think, is a really solid one. I feel like it gets a bad reputation, but I think they did a pretty good job. It, of course, introduced the card back that we're still using to this day, or at least were until a couple weeks ago when they finally changed it. But again, that's another thing we'll talk about next episode. There's a lot to talk about in the next few episodes. While the last few years kind of seem to blend together in the Cars diecast line, each one is pretty distinct, despite all sharing the same card back and some interesting concepts. So let's take a closer look at Revney here. He is very similar in design to Chuck Manifold. This is a very common generic Cars background character shape. And we actually have several molds that capture it in the Cars diecast line. Revney may look like he's using Chuck's mold, but I'm sure you can already tell he is quite a bit larger than him. He's actually using the Sarah Wilson mold introduced the year prior. There's also Jen Tansedan, who uses a similar mold. There is last year's release, Masha Elsren, who also uses a similar mold, except the original packaging said she was a pickup truck, which was hilarious. We'll cover that another time. So he is a pretty common type of car, but one that, for whatever reason, has several molds. I really like the facial expression on this guy. Ironically, much like the original Vern, you never see the front of Revney in the movie, and they decided to give him a concerned facial expression. Vern also has kind of a concerned facial expression, so, headcanon, whatever you want about these guys. I don't know what their dynamic is, but it seems that they're both not very good at their jobs, maybe. But I really like the sculpting on this guy, especially the mouth. The mouth sculpt is really good with the shape there, and I really do like the eye expression. Not often we get cars that are all white, It's a very stark white color, but, stands out. Taxis have to be a color that stands out. I like the addition of the mirrors being black, and of course he has the little Vern's cap there with writing on either side. This is just kind of how we see Vern in the movie. We also see him, we see him twice. I see him at the Wheelwell Motel next to Colin Borev, who also got a release this year, and we also saw him later on in the movie at Flo's V8 Cafe. That's really what I love about this year, just the really great movie background characters. They did some really, really cool items, and, considering in the year since, we haven't gotten too many movie releases with the focus on Cars on the Road and the focus on Expanded Universe for the last few years. It really disappoints me because we were in a pretty cool place with the movie releases in 2022, and I hope to someday see some more like what they were doing there, with some very unique background characters from interesting categories from all three movies. That's why I think it's such an underrated year. So often, one thing dominates the Cars diecast line, and this year, it was Cars on the Road, but for the first several months, it wasn't, and we got a good mix of stuff from all three movies. We've got Vern's Taxi written on the side, 938-8885, and a logo just like the one that's on Vern, but in different colors, which is a really nice touch. On the back, his license plate reads 903HJ. Hopefully it's not the same as... Oh, she doesn't have one. Okay, never mind. Oops. There is a look at the other side, where we once again have that phone number. Revney looks a little disturbed that I'm looking at him. Luckily for him, we're wrapping up the review. And finally, there is a look at the base. This is a car that I really like because it's such a great obscure concept. The other Vern's Taxi. Something I never thought we'd get. And like I just said a minute ago, I really hope the Cars diecast line does stuff like this again soon. We've been getting a lot of very solid releases these last few years, but 2022 is notable for being the last year to give us a big focus on the Cars movies, with, for whatever reason, them not really focusing on them the last few years. 2022 was also the final year to have deluxes in the main line. 2022 was, I guess you could consider it, start of a sort of downfall era for the Cars diecast line. While the next few years are full of solid releases, there are things that I've definitely missed. So it's going to be interesting to look at the next few years, which are, in my opinion, more mixed bags. But hey, this series celebrates Cars and all that it is, and I think there are some really great items in the Cars on the Road and post-Cars on the Road era. And while I'll always be negative when I have to be, it's my job as a reviewer to give my honest thoughts. This is a series about celebrating cars, and even if there are things in the years following this that I'm not the biggest fan of, I want to celebrate the good. Anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye now. I just realized it's going to be a nightmare to crop this guy out of the picture I take for the thumbnail. White on white, it's pretty difficult.